natural selection. This is a random force because individuals don't have the adaptations. Okay? Now, having said all this, for some of these, like hurricanes, there are trees that are adapted to hurricanes. There's a tree in Florida and further south called the banyan tree. If you've ever been to Florida, what it does is it sends up a big trunk, and then the branches, they send down these weird roots called adventitious roots, right? And you end up with 30 or 40 stems holding this one tree in place. Well, these things don't have any problem with hurricanes. So in that case, this hurricane force acts as a natural selection force on banyan trees, but it would act as a bottleneck force on fruit flies. Does that make sense? All right. Then I have an example of this. This particular organism here, these are elephant seals in California. They were hunted indiscriminately by humans, and as humans hunted them, they drove their numbers way down. Humans are indiscriminate hunters. We're much better able to hunt them than they are to evade the hunting. So there were no alleles that allowed them to evade humans, and therefore we're not talking about a natural selection force, we're talking about a bottleneck. Here, in the 19th century, the population of elephant seals was reduced to perhaps no more than 20 individuals. Is that okay? 20 individuals left. Then they put in place some protections for the elephant seals, and now the seal population has rebounded to tens of thousands. But the problem is, whatever genetic diversity existed before the hunting, the bottleneck removed that genetic diversity. And here, this species of elephant seal has lost almost all of its genetic variation. What are the consequences for this elephant seal population for having gone through a bottleneck? Well, the consequence initially is a loss of genetic variation. But there are effects of having lost genetic variation. In order for natural selection to work properly, the genetic variation has to be there. If there's no genetic variation, natural selection does not work as well. Remember the requirement for natural selection, individuals have to differ from each other. Some of those differences have to be heritable. Well, that's heritable differences, that's differences in alleles among individuals, that's genetic variation. Without the genetic variation, natural selection has trouble operating, and if you don't have natural selection working, you don't get adaptations. Which means if the environment changes on these elephant seals, they are in big trouble because they don't have the capacity to evolve with a changing environment, because the prerequisite genetic variation that allows natural selection to do that, it doesn't exist. Okay? All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop it here. When we pick up next time, we'll move into the, actually this should be 4, shouldn't it? As I sit here and think about it, number 1 was mutation, number 2 was migration, 3 was selection. That means 4 is genetic drift and drift-like forces. So that means we have one more evolutionary force left to talk about, and that's sexual selection. And I'll see you on the other side. Take care.